Sheriff John Boggs wasn't the kind of man to mess around with. Twice divorced, steady gait, big old cowboy hat, surly and mean. This is a picture of him smiling. So folks said that after Dick was dead, Boggs and his posse kept some of the gold. And, most days though, he rode the same trail until the trail knew him back. He'd go up along Fittymint where the fields dip, over the humps towards, 12 Bridges, north towards Sheridan, and then, and then he'd make his way back down through Virginia Town and go to the train depot downtown and, to hear what the rails had to say and put a signature on whatever the day had delivered. So with that would be a tidy little portrait of his usual day if gold didn't get itself into the middle of this. See, the old timers had another name you needed to know before you got too far into the legend of Boggs Gold, and that's Rattlesnake Dick. His real name was Richard Barter. He died young in 1859, shot in Placer County, not too far from here, in Auburn, by Boggs's posse, in fact. Dick and his gang robbed shipments, scattered to the hills, and hid what they couldn't carry down here in the valley where they stayed for the winter. For all the blood they spilled on his land, there was one detail that never satisfied anybody, and that was not all the gold from those robberies was found. Some of it got back to banks and owners, some of it got claimed by the sheriffs, and some of it, it just disappeared. It was sitting out there stashed by criminals or has already been taken, who knows. Back then, Boggs served as a deputy undersheriff and led posses, in the late 1850s. He's noted in the county records for 1859 pursuit of Rattlesnake Dick, including leading the posse that found Dick's body after Auburn shootout. Before Placer County Sheriff, he worked as one of the first watchmen in Auburn, so basically a police officer. So he was no stranger to the law or Rattlesnake Dick. Most say that's how he ended up with the gold, actually. So when Rattlesnake Dick, Richard Barter, was killed in 1859, his gang had already stolen a substantial amount of gold from mule trains in Placer County. So some of the gold was recovered after shootouts, but large portion was never accounted for. This wasn't a rumor, it was actually recorded, and that vacuum invites suspicion, Much of that gold was untraceable, unmarked bars, loose dust, and anonymous shipments. So if anybody could pocket a share without record, it wasn't the outlaws, it was the lawmen. So no one accuses Boggs of ambushing Dick or robbing the strong box or anything like that. The rumors begin accusing him of something quieter and more believable. So taking a lawful recovery of it and not turning it all in is the basic idea of what people think happened. In frontier justice, possession was 9/10 of the law. So if Boggs' posse recovered hidden gold from Rattlesnake Dick's cache and he only logged part of it, folks believed he may have buried the rest for himself. Or at least if anyone knew where the rest of that gold was buried, it was Boggs. So Boggs did go on to be elected as sheriff of Placer County. And the way people tell it, Boggs was known to be tough and fearless. In 1958, Dick was caught by Boggs trying to break out of Auburn prison while awaiting trial. And before the trial could actually take place, Dick had successfully escaped. And then once free, the outlaw sought to avenge his capture. And so he camped out all night outside of John Boggs' house. And John wasn't there and didn't return until the next morning, and he found a threatening note from Rattlesnake Dick pinned to his front door. So time was short for the young bandit, I gotta tell you. However, on July 11th, 1959, Boggs' posse caught up with Dick and a companion on a stage road near Auburn, and the outlaws were shot on their way out of the ambush. So, they killed one posse member. But not before Dick had taken a couple bullets. So rather than going to prison again, he finished the job with a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. Boggs himself was there with his posse when the body was found, but there's no mention of Boggs killing him personally. And, and that should be the end of it. Evidence goes where evidence goes, and the bad guys are dead, and it's settled, and, and that's about it. But a phrase was created, and that phrase was simple, and it had weight to it that you could set a table on, and that's Boggs Gold. So here's how the old timers, told the story. They say he didn't just catch the bad guy and return the loot, but he actually kept some. It didn't explode into a scandal because there was none as far as the sheriff was concerned. People didn't shout out about it. They said it under their breath when a story had run far enough away from Sunday manners. They'd say, they'd murmur over coffee at the counter, some of that outlaw gold never made it back to Sacramento. They say it became Boggs Gold. What did they mean by that? They meant he didn't give back all the rattlesnake steaks haul, and it was swept under the rug, and the whole thing went cold. So, although around these parts the lack of evidence can sound louder than a file box full of facts, but that was pretty commonplace back then. So, it's a little different. It's not that folks meant to stain the man by name. He's, I'm sure, a very honorable man, but you can't keep the word missing gold in a sentence very long before the air changes around it. Men who never stole as much as a spoon started feeling clever, men who never accused anybody of anything started doing the math, what if the gold that Rattlesnake Dick didn't live to enjoy ended up with Boggs? Now before you put a rope on that and, drag it off to the gallows, let's set the scene, right? So this is the 1800s, and sheriffs were killed over much less than accusations. You and your posse haven't been paid, and your budget is bone dry. The criminal was stalking you, and one of your deputies was shot and killed. Where should he take the gold? To the county safe? Sure, that's where it should go. Maybe you do it by the book, and then right up at the moment you realize the book doesn't feed your deputies, right? So the legend says that he did recover something. If it's true, he didn't flaunt it. He didn't spend it on himself, apparently. He kept working and was elected to county sheriff. It's not really the actions of somebody who stole gold. So, when he died, there wasn't a ripple on the surface big enough to tell you what lay on the bottom. So, on the other hand, not all sheriffs at that time in history were known for their professionalism. It was a Wild West. So that's the kind of thing that leaves people thirsty for gold, years after it happened. So, and then the years went by and names on office doors changed, and the day arrived when John Boggs, twice divorced, died without much fanfare. When men die without much and, not much at all, then, people come up with some heavy stories to look for a place to fall. So they fell right onto John's gold. Maybe he hid it, the feed store crowd would say, leaning into a counter that knew just about every elbow in town. Man rode in the same trails long enough, to know a dozen good holes where the shovels don't echo, some would say. They'd name spots like landmarks, that rock shelf on Dry Creek, or, that root tangle from the big oak that fell on Wise Road last winter. The bank below Sheridan where the wash goes dry every August. The rumors flew throughout time. Maybe it returned to its owner, the kinder souls, argued. And then there was the third group, the practical ones who like their coffee black and their history short. So, they'd say maybe there was no gold. Who knows? I'll tell you the part I can't stop thinking about, though. What happens when a man looks at the world he's about to leave and decides the safest place for some secrets isn't in a bank account, it's in a hole in the ground. Quiet, harmless, waiting on safe times to be found, not to sully his family's name. So now let's put on boots on the ground and walk through the three different theories, the way Boggs might have, no ghosts, no fairy tales, just a few theories, okay? So the first theory is that he stole it, that he hid it. Legend says he took it, became a so-called hero by killing Dick, and couldn't spend it, and so he hid it and it was lost to time. There's dozens of places nearby where you could put something a few feet down and make it disappear. Under Dry Creek's rock shelf that looks ordinary to anybody who didn't watch it grow old, or in the root ball of an oak that holds, the last season's dust every year, that can really build up. So the second theory, he returned it or used it for community goodwill. Imagine a man quietly balancing out books that nobody ever asked to see. They don't exist. So when a need calls, he used it, for equipment, or for a widow whose husband left them destitute, or a storekeeper who had to rebuild after a fire. He folded what he held into an envelope and knocked on the door and made things even. He didn't call it charity; he called doing the right thing. So, take from the criminals, give it to the honest. There could be a comparison to Robin Hood there, or he found the owners and returned it. You just never know. The third theory is that he never had anything to begin with, right? Like that, it's just a legend, right? So, drive out past Sheridan and say Rattlesnake Dick, Dick's name 3 times and the treasure will appear, I'm just kidding. There's no truth to that or the story, necessarily. So, what if the missing balloon was mostly legend with a few hard ounces to keep it shiny, that, the recovered cash was smaller than a legend could stay alive on. And that's a real big possibility. That's the way legends grow and never die. So in the end, a man died with a worn out coat in a town that wanted more out of the ending than the truth was willing to give. Sometimes a good story is the most valuable payments folks can ever receive. It's like a pretty big compliment, So anyways, which one do I believe? I don't, right? That's not my job here. My job here is to tell you the story that, still walks the fence line of our conversations. It's because we choose what to remember about John Boggs, and the things we are remembered, wasn't his badge. It was his silence. His silence makes a good fall sometimes. When people talk about Boggs Gold, they don't talk about spending. They talk about places, right? Not how much, but where. Not who owned it, but who kept it. It's not a get-rich tale. It's still a mystery. Maybe it's a keep the faith tale for, told by people who measure wealth by trust. Maybe he stole it. Maybe he protected it. Maybe he simply chose not to let it be wasted by strangers. Maybe it never existed. Any of those endings fits a man in a rowdy gold rush county like Placer. But that's why the story never ends. Stories that can't be proven don't die, and they become legend. And the man at the center, a sheriff that people trusted and suspected in the same breath. The truth is that Sheriff Boggs was the only one who knows. Boggs Gold is not a treasure map; it's a measure of a man. So let's do our reality check. So what's historically grounded? In 1879, Sheriff John Boggs was elected sheriff of Placer County and became a respected lawman in the area and rid the county of many criminals, including Tom Bell and his gang and Rattlesnake Dick, and he was known to be one tough mofo. By 1853, Boggs was a town watchman in Auburn and started his long career in law enforcement in Placer County. He was also deputy county assessor in 1967 and the county assessor in 1969. He became undersheriff in 1877 and the Placer County sheriff in 1879. So he's right in there, with Rattlesnake Dick. 19th century probates often list, minimal estates, even for respected officials, modest pay, private generosity, and, lost fragmentary papers were common. Rattlesnake Dick, Richard Barter, was a real Placer County outlaw. He died after a shootout, part of the gang's stolen gold was, recovered, but part was never accounted for. So that is fact. Frontier sheriffs, including Placer County, procedures existed, but record keeping could be incomplete, especially in smaller offices or when records changed hands over the years. Dick did stalk Boggs after escaping from prison to catch him and get his version of justice or revenge. Boggs posse did kill Rattlesnake Dick. Rattlesnake Dick took his own life, but it's because he was shot by him. Anyways, there is or was gold missing from Dick's recovered loot. What's plausible but just legend, right? That Sheriff John Boggs personally recovered a portion of Rattlesnake Dick's missing bullion as evidence and later kept its location or disposition quiet. This is a local legend. Okay, there's no truth there. The phrase Boggs Gold is a period term. It functions as, an example here of how locals talk about the rumor. It's not a documented headline. If new documents surface linking Boggs to recover bullion, I'll revise the truth versus talk narrative to match the record. Until then, Boggs Gold stays what it always has been out here. A respectable question with a few good answers. So thanks for watching another strange story of Lincoln. Keep your eye out for the next episode. If you like this one, share it with somebody who cares about our town or simply likes storytelling. As always, I'm Mike Crossfield, a local business owner trying to build a stronger Lincoln together. So until next time, take care. Good night.